we're looking for a guarantee. We're looking for a way to emergency-proof our lives because we think falling is bad. And the truth is that every story of heroism, there is a moment where the hero is wounded by their own folly, right? So Jacob wrestles with God or the angel or, both, however you interpret that story. Bless me, bless me. And he gets the blessing. He gets what he wants, and he walks with a limp for the rest of his life. This happens over and over again in every great narrative because that is how life works. You want something, and you don't quite understand what you're asking for. And the wanting is not necessarily bad. This is where I think in communities of faith, we sometimes get this wrong as we go, you have everything that you want, you're blessed, you're fine, and don't pay attention to your heart, your desire. That is how all great stories start, is you want something. And what happens is you experience conflict. And at some point, the desire can be transformed. You can transcend the, I want to make money, I want to be famous, I want a family, I want to move, whatever the goal is. And through that experience, you learn a deeper lesson. There's an internal lesson. There's a spiritual lesson to learn.
I've learned so much over this first year of podcasting, and I wanted to share with you guys the 10 most life-changing lessons that I've learned this year. So I created a document, and it's on my website. What you're going to do, you're going to go there. It's going to be 10 life-changing lessons. Click on that button. It'll ask for your email address so I can email it to you. Sign up for it, because these life lessons radically changed the way I viewed my life and the way I started living. It helped me to get better in the areas that I've so desperately wanted to see progress and growth in. And because I know they helped me, I really believe that they will help you. And I wanted this to be a gift for you guys. So I really hope you enjoy this gift, and go to the website, thewholepersonpodcast.com, to get it. It's free, and I hope you guys enjoy and learn as much as I did from it. Today, we get to interview someone who has an amazing creative ability and does so for a living. Jeff Goins is a best-selling author of 5 books, which include The Art of Work and Real Artists Don't Starve. On his blog, he shares thoughts on writing, life, and creative work. Jeff says we all have a creative gift worth sharing with the world, and that this is our art. So whether you have business ideas, a book in you, or some other project you want to start, his goal is to help you get your work out of you and into the world. So Jeff, thank you so much for coming on to the show. And if you are a creative person, you can connect with Jeff at www.goinswriting.com. Jeff, again, thank you so much for coming to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Evan. Good to be here.
So, just to get it kicked off, man, how long have you been on your writing journey?
I've written my whole life. I've been creative my whole life. I've made all kinds of things growing up, from Garfield comics to my own superhero comic books to eventually playing music, starting bands, acting. And writing was the thing that sort of undergirded everything. It was always the thing that I kept returning to. I do like creating things and sharing them with the world, whether that's a speech, a book, a podcast, a blog post, a conference, whatever. And in terms of like professional writing, though, the work that I've been doing as it exists today, I've really been doing since the end of 2010. And I remember talking to Stephen Pressfield about this, who is a brilliant author, hero of mine. He wrote a book called The War of Art, which is a must-read for anybody who wants to be more creative and wants to break through their own creative blocks. But he said, how long have you been doing this? And I was like, well, almost 10 years, right? And he goes, oh, not that long then, right? And here I was, in my mid-30s thinking, I've been doing this for a while. People look to me for advice. And I love the humility and the context of saying, if you've only been doing this for a decade, then you're just getting started. And I hope that's true of me.
That's awesome. So let's just kind of get into the creative aspect, because I know there's a lot of people out there that want to create. So how does a person go from zero to finding the starting point of their own creative voice?
I mean, I think you have to do that by recognizing that you already are creative. You know, I was speaking with someone yesterday and they said, I'm not creative. And I said, how many books have you written? 4, right? How many businesses have you started? 10. And you podcast and blog and you like make things for a living, right? Yes, but I'm not creative. And what he said was really interesting. He said, because I don't make anything new, I just take other people's ideas and I make them better. And I thought, oh, that's actually very interesting. That's like creative myth number 1, which is that in order to be creative, you have to make something original. And the truth is that all great artists steal and they iterate. They take somebody else's idea, they borrow it, and they make it better. They build on it in some way. And the difference between a copycat and an artist is the copycat steals and just kind of reproduces the same thing more or less, whereas the artist takes, they borrow, they steal, whatever you want to call it, they copy from their peers, their predecessors, their heroes, and then they do something new with the source material, right? They rearrange the notes and make a new song. They remix it. They take that style and they overlay it with their own voice and their own style. So the beginning of the creative process really does start with stealing, but it ends with remixing and curating and creating something that you, the artist, the creative person behind it, are going to go, well, it's not that original because I was borrowing from this person and that person and that person. But everybody who sees it goes, wow, that's amazing. And the historian Will Durant says, nothing is new except arrangement. And I think this day and age, Austin Kleon says we have to steal like an artist, understanding that we're all creative. And that creativity, more often than not, is taking different things and combining them in new and interesting ways. And in that respect, we're all creating things every single day.
So let's say I am someone who doesn't paint, doesn't write books, doesn't podcast, draw, write music. How do I find my creative gene or my outlet?
Yeah. I mean, I think the simplest way to do it is to find a problem that you want to solve. Well, first of all, you don't have to be creative. If you go, I don't want to be creative. Okay, fine. That's great. I maintain that every human being is creative just by design. There's no one that's ever been you the way that you are, right? So you have some sort of unique contribution to make to the world by virtue of the fact that there's never been you, right? What does Dr. Seuss say? There is no one who is youer than you, right? So you are this kind of unique creation, and I believe that we all have something that we're here to do. So if you do aspire to do that something, it is going to be a creative act because nobody has ever done the thing that you're going to do the way that you hopefully do it. So to answer your question, Evan, I think you look for a problem. Creativity is really about solving problems. Even if the problem is I'm bored and I need somebody to entertain me with a story or a movie or a poem or an idea, or we need a more efficient way to travel or distribute food to developing countries, whatever it might be. So you find a problem and then you find a solution to that problem that takes two dissimilar things and combines them. I think the easiest way to be creative is to take, to find some problem and go, has anyone tried to solve this with these two things that have, never been combined before? And so take cooking, for example. What if we, there's that scene in Ratatouille. I have young kids, so all of my illustrations come from Pixar movies, right? There's that scene in Ratatouille where he's doing this, actually. He's eating a grape, eating a piece of cheese, eating a grape, eating a piece of cheese. He's like, what if I put these together? And he sticks it in his mouth. He's like, wow, it unlocks all these different kinds of flavors. When I was a kid, I was, eating Cheerios, drinking a glass of orange juice, eating Cheerios, drinking a glass of orange juice. And I was like, wait a second, and I poured myself a new bowl of Cheerios. I did this, I'm not kidding. And I took a glass of orange juice and I poured it in the bowl of Cheerios. And I'm like, oh yeah, that doesn't work. So that's what creativity is. It's taking things that are different, putting them together in new and interesting ways. And sometimes it's amazing. and sometimes it's not. But that is the fastest, easiest way to be creative. Yeah, is to go, what if I do this plus this? Not try to make something new, but just take two things that have never been combined before and go, what about this? You look at the genius of Apple, that is what they did. They kind of introduced two groups of people. It has been, in some ways, they invented the idea of the creative entrepreneur, right?
Right.
The guy or gal sitting at their, at a coffee shop in a hoodie, with their laptop, actually like making money doing things. I mean, that was a whole new way of doing business, and there was a style, there was an aesthetic behind it, and there was an understanding of how technology should just work. And then you look at the iPhone, the best-selling product of all time. There's nothing new about it. It wasn't the first cell phone. It wasn't the first PDA, and at the same time, it wasn't a better BlackBerry. What they did was they took the digital camera, right? They took the touch screen PDA, and they took a cell phone, and they combined them. They said, what if we combine this in a new and more beautiful way that just works? And there's one button, right? And in doing that, not creating anything new, but combining basically three different categories, putting them together and wrapping it in a beautiful, functional, efficient package, they created the best-selling product of all time.
I love the idea of how creativity kind of brings or breathes life into people. Yeah. It inspires people. And I guess what I'm asking is, how does creativity or the lack thereof affect an individual in the world around them in the terms of, faith or family, finances, friendship, fitness, and fun?
That's a lot of F's. Every problem that you have will be solved with creativity. Every problem that you've ever had or that has ever existed in the world was solved through someone being creative. So how does it affect the world? Significantly. You and I are having a conversation across 1,000+ miles of distance, and it's happening like this, right? We are drinking water that is not contaminated, that came out of faucets or refrigerators, because somebody said, what if we do this? Or could we do this better, right? So somebody stood up and was creative. Now, what happens when you and I tap into that same fount of creativity? You want to talk about faith. I believe that we are created and made in the image of a creator, someone, a force that has brought all things into existence. And so it actually is in the DNA of what it means to be human. So when we step into that, right? When we get creative, when we combine two different things and experience something new, I think we come alive, right? It's like playing with your kids, right? And I think every parent, at least every dad that I know, sometimes experiences that reluctance where your kids are like, come play with me, daddy. It's like, I'm tired. I've been working all day. I don't want to get off the couch and get on the ground and get on my knees and play. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't. And whenever I kind of lean into that and experience the imaginary world of fairies and princesses and dragons and Pokemon and whatever, depending on which kid I'm playing with, the 4-year-old or the 7-year-old, I go, oh wow, this is what it means to be alive, right? This is what it means to actually feel like I'm alive today, is to be creative, to make something new. On the days where I don't create. And that doesn't mean necessarily writing an essay or painting a painting. It could mean that, or writing a song. It could also mean like I did something that has never been done before. The way that I did it, I solved a problem. I made a connection that has never been made before. On the days when I don't feel like I really did that, they don't feel like whole days. And so how does it affect the person? I think there are times when you're in a flow state. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi says that this is the highest state of a human being, right? Is to be happy. But happiness comes from flow, right? You don't seek happiness, you seek flow, which is where challenge meets competency. So think about something that you're pretty good at, but that is also difficult for you, which can be so on one hand, there are things that you're really good at that are easy for you, and it's pretty easy to get bored at those things. And there are some things that are so hard and you're not good at them, and that causes a lot of stress and anxiety for most people. And so flow is the place where your skill meets a worthy challenge, and it's hard but not too hard, and you're good at it, but there's still something to learn. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi calls that the highest state of a human being. It's a flow state. When we're creating, we're in that state. So why be creative? It'll make you happy. It'll make the world a better place. It will solve problems for yourself, your family, your community, and so on.
So as you were kind of dialoguing through all of that, a couple things came to my mind, stuff that I've never thought about. So if I can butcher this, it's because I'm talking about it on the spot as I'm working my way through it. So you talked about being created by a creator, kind of in DNA and in one's image. For me, the way, and I'm not talking about how you perceive it, but I believe in God the Father who created the Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross. But if I go back to the very beginning of Scripture where it says Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, so you have time, who, God, action did what? Create, result, heaven and earth. So in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And so there's this formula essentially for creation that has taken place. And I think we can copy that, which that formula, let me try this again here. In the beginning, so there's time, God, who, which now if we created that formula for ourselves, so it'd be in a action of time, I did something, action, create, result is what I'm creating. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I don't know where to go with that, but as you were talking, like it came into a formula, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, and actually, I mean, if you want to get theological about things, creativity, the act of making things actually doesn't exist outside of time, right? So there is formless void before God begins to create the heavens and the earth. And so outside of time, there is no creation. There is no creativity. And so in time, which is the space in which we exist, the thing we call creation is essentially making the immaterial material, which is in a way participating in divinity. It is experiencing the image and likeness of God, right?
Wow. That is deep.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I mean, this, you can, if you want to, get biblical about things, Colossians says, in him and through him, all things are made. He is the image of the invisible God. And so, these are not just Christian ideas. These are Jewish ideas, and they're also Hellenistic Greek kind of philosophies. And so there is this concept of the sort of just divinity, what Christians would call God the Father. And so when, the Apostle John is writing, the Gospel of John, and when Paul is writing to the Church of Colossae, they're accessing some of these ideas that actually go back to like Stoicism and all kinds of things. But what they're talking about is the Logos, right? And in the New Testament, they call the Logos Christ, right? This is the same thing. In the beginning was the Word, Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so the Logos is the concept that there's an invisible God that has to express itself through matter, which is the Christ, right? So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And so you've got invisible divinity, then you've got sort of the visible expression of that divinity. And so that's why it says, in him and through him, all things were made. He is the firstborn of all creation. Before time. So this is the concept of, in the Trinity, the Christian idea of Trinity, God the Son. So what's interesting about that is God is not just creator, God is also creation. right? And so there is this sort of interwoven, I am, someone who is making things and participating in the things that they're making. So what does that mean? Again, from a philosophical, theological standpoint, if we are to understand we as human beings are made in the image of God by God. Same kind of thing, little creators who can create things and in some ways participate in the creation that they've made. Parenting is kind of an interesting way of thinking about this because you did make your child and you didn't. You did create them and they're completely other from you. And yet you get to sort of participate in the formation of who these people are and at the same time not control it. And there is something very beautiful and equally frustrating about that process. And I would say that is the creative process, right? I could write a book and share it with the world, and people get all kinds of things out of it that I didn't intend for them to get out of it. Beautiful, wonderful, and sometimes terrible things, right? And this is the risk and the beauty and the opportunity of creativity, is that you make things that in some ways sort of expand, because that's what all creation does, is it grows, it expands, you plant a seed in the ground and it grows into a tree and it keeps going. And so I do think that our job as creative people, as creative beings, is to plant the seeds that we're here to plant and trust that they're going to grow how they're meant to grow, and not try to get too broken up and frustrated by that tree isn't doing what I wanted it to do, right? That child isn't doing what I wanted it to do. This podcast isn't doing what I wanted it to do. I think that is the beauty of the creative process, and it can be incredibly frustrating if you're trying to control it.
How does a person go about, through all what we just talked about, finding their purpose and calling?
Yeah, I wrote an entire book about finding your calling called The Art of Work, and that was published in 2015, and I still stand by that book and agree with most of the things I said in it. And my understanding of calling has evolved, which is that I think the best thing for a person to do is to be who they are, to be their true self. And that looks a lot of different ways for a lot of different people, and nobody gets to tell you what it is. I don't think it's necessarily a vocation. I don't think it's, a job or a single thing that you do. I think your calling is your entire life. And I think the way that you find that calling is realizing that you're already living a story, right? And I like what Parker Palmer says about calling, vocation. He says, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, which is our traditional way of looking at goal setting, I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to start a podcast and become an author and whatever. Before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I need to listen to my life telling me who I am. And so when it comes to calling, vocation, purpose, and we're talking about creativity, I do think the process begins with listening. And the way that we listen, and you could do that through prayer, meditation, mentoring, but you can also do it, and I would highly recommend this, is like actually looking at your life. What are the key moments in life where I felt most alive, where I felt that feeling of flow? And what was I doing when I was doing that? And what does life look like if I do more of those things? I believe that creativity, making things, again, because we're all doing this, right? The work that you do, the podcast that you record, the conversations that you have, these are all creative acts in the sense that you're taking something, you're taking the immaterial and you're in some way making it material. I think that we find our calling through those experiences. Most people wait for clarity before they're willing to take some kind of massive action, like quit their job, move to another country, start a business, whatever. And I think that clarity only ever comes with action. And so we create things to find our calling. We don't wait for our calling and go, I found my calling. I went in a cave. I spent a month on a mountaintop or a weekend at a retreat center, and God spoke to me and this thing happened and now I'm going to go do it. Those things can happen, but more often than not, we experience the voice of vocation, that calling, through active engagement with some new thing. And so I think, practically speaking, you try a lot of different things and you tune into what's going on in my spirit, in my body, what's happening in terms of how I'm engaging with this person, this experience, what have you, and looking for resonance, right? And as you try lots of different things, you're going to get a sense of what you're here to do and what resonates with you. And I believe that most people can feel that. They can feel when they're, and you could call it a flow state. You could call it sort of a spiritual state. I think in many ways we're talking about the same thing, but it's going, oh, this is what I'm here to do. I met a woman named Jenny Pong, who was the first full-time Singaporean doula. A doula is a birth coach. And she was a single mother, and she was doing all these natural child rearing things that were practices that were not typical in Singapore at the time that she raised her child. And then one day a friend said, hey, you should become a doula, because she had a birth coach. And she says, okay, I'll try it. And at the first birth with the birth mother that she was working with, and she was the birth coach, so she's coaching him through this process. She said, immediately it felt like I was slipping into an old pair of shoes, right? It just felt very, very familiar. And I think many people have had experiences like that, where it's like, I've never done this before, and yet it feels familiar. This just might be what I'm here to do, which really is a way of saying this is a part of the calling that I received, and I will spend the rest of my life trying different things and experiencing my life to figure out what it's all about. But I do think try lots of different things and see what resonates.
My next question, it's hard for me to ask this in a question. So as I was thinking about this, I actually kind of wrote down a picture that can explain it better, especially since you like Disney. This okay. So
sure. Okay.
Now that we have the idea of, hypothetically, someone comes into, okay, now I have my purpose and calling. I know what it is. Imagine you're like Tarzan swinging from one forest rope to another. Uh-huh. And there's this apex at the point of where you're holding onto one rope that is propelling you forward so that you can grab on to another. But if you let go too soon of your current rope, you'll fall down onto the jungle floor. But while grabbing onto the next jungle rope that is to propel you forward, if you hold on to the old rope just a little too long, it will hold you back and drop you to the jungle floor. How do you find in life that apex of transition where you're leaving one situation to the next situation so that you don't hit the jungle floor?
That's a lovely analogy. And the answer is you don't. Because if you go watch Tarzan, he falls.
He does.
And so how do you find that apex? By falling. And that's life. But by the end of the movie, he's not falling very much. And I think we're all looking for a way to get a guarantee. Even the idea of, I found my calling and this is what I'm going to go do next. I have said those words, and my understanding of my life and what I'm here to do since saying those words has changed. And how could it not? Right? That would be like saying, what I think we often, that would be like saying, I'm done growing. Right? And again, parenting is a wonderful analogy for life, because every 7 years, you and I are cellularly, at a cellular level, completely different. And every like 12 to 14 months, about like 80 to 90% of us is almost completely different. But every 7 years, you're a completely different person. And yet you mostly look the same. You know, maybe your hairline is receded a little bit more, have a little bit more gray hairs, a little more padding for us guys a lot of times. But you think of yourself as the same person. But when you look at your kids, you know, like I have a 7-year-old, and like it would be absurd for me to say, just stay 7. You know, and yet sometimes I kind of want them to, because it's a cool age and whatever. And yet I think we often do that with ourselves, where we go, just stay this way. Like just you've made it, right? You found your calling, so just do that forever. You found your purpose, and so this is what it is. And I don't think that's how it works. I think our understanding of who we are and what we're here to do necessarily and naturally evolves. Story is a really great metaphor for life. And so what you find in a story is you often have a character who wants something, and they have to face and overcome tremendous conflict to get the thing that they want. But the point of a story is that there's almost always an epiphany where the character realizes something about themselves that they didn't know. So this is kind of the internal and external conflict. And often the internal conflict is, do I have what it takes? Right? Or do I have to prove my dad wrong? Or am I really lovable? Or whatever. And so what's interesting about stories is you often have a character pursue a goal, overcome conflict to get it, and they either get it or they don't. Sometimes they don't get it. But the point of the story is the transformation that happens in the character afterwards. And they realize, all this success wasn't really worth losing my family. So I'm going to go back home or whatever. Or Frodo comes back to the Shire, which is what he wants to do the whole time, right? Is just get rid of the ring. That's the goal. Got rid of the ring, go back to the Shire, and he goes, oh, I don't fit here anymore. And so I think we have to be careful with thinking that the point of life is to find out the purpose, the reason, the calling, and then just kind of coast for the rest of your life. Because the truth is that Tarzan isn't actually here to just swing on vines. Right? He's here to fall. He's here to get back up. He's here to, and that's actually a great movie, by the way. I watched this recently with my kids. He's here to rescue Jane. And he actually has this conflict. The internal conflict is, this is where I'm from, right? So do I stay here? And initially he goes, no, I can't leave, even though I've fallen in love with Jane. And so then she leaves, and there's this whole, battle. And then he eventually decides he's going to go with her. And so we're looking for a guarantee. We're looking for a way to emergency proof our lives because we think falling is bad. And the truth is that every story of heroism, there is a moment where the hero is wounded by their own folly, right? So Jacob wrestles with God or the angel or, both, however you interpret that story. Bless me, bless me. And he gets the blessing. He gets what he wants, and he walks with a limp for the rest of his life. This happens over and over again in every great narrative, because that is how life works. You want something and you don't quite understand what you're asking for. And the wanting is not necessarily bad. This is where I think in communities of faith, we sometimes get this wrong as we go, you have everything that you want, you're blessed, you're fine, and don't pay attention to your heart, your desire. That is how all great stories start, is you want something. And what happens is you experience conflict. And at some point, the desire can be transformed. You can transcend I want to make money. I want to be famous. I want a family. I want to move, whatever the goal is. And through that experience, you learn a deeper lesson. There's an internal lesson. There's a spiritual lesson to learn. So I think calling works that way too. You're like, I'm here to be a podcaster or a pastor, or and men often go, this is my job. I've got to do it. Right. And you go put that role on. And then part of listening to your life is kind of paying attention to all the different levels at which you're operating. I'm doing this thing physically, but then what's going on with me internally? What am I learning about myself through this experience? And so I think when Tarzan falls, he's learning something about himself, right? When he abandons his family for a girl, he's learning something about himself. When he goes back to his family, he's learning something about himself. And so similarly, we need to pay attention to every part of the story, including the moments where we fall down and we go, oh, I didn't expect that. This is not part of the goal. This is not part of the story. What's going on here? That's as much a part of the calling as the angel blessing you.
It's really funny. I don't know if you know this. If the listeners have consistently listened to the podcast, they will. You specifically said the word pastor in that. Mm-hmm. And since I was 7, I had been wanting to be a pastor. I went to school. I got a degree in theology. Mm-hmm. I pursued ministry vocationally. Mm-hmm. And it just, you talk about Tarzan falling off the rope. It's like gym class when the scrawny kid with the arms who couldn't even get up and kept falling off. And then when I finally gave all that up and looked for another way of expression, the podcast comes, getting a small local TV show that had one episode came. All these other things start coming. Yeah. It only lasted one season, so but still, I'm seeing some other things. And so it's really funny that you said that, because I feel like, I asked that question of Tarzan because I was wanting the safe answer. I was wanting, okay, so now that I'm doing podcasting and I want to start writing and I want to go that route, how do I transition from where I am, to the next one without falling? Because I have a family and I don't want to put them in any more hurt. And honestly, I don't think my heart can take more hurt or failure right now. I don't know. So it's just really neat that you said that, because it just resonated.
Yeah, the story is quite interesting because by the end of the story, he's not swinging on vines anymore. And this is what happens, right? He's on a boat and he's headed to England. That is the end of the story, that part of the story. And if you know anything about the Tarzan, the original Tarzan story, there's all these stories about him going to Europe, coming back, and there's all these things going on. And so that is, if you look at the Joseph Campbell monomyth structure of storytelling and understanding mythology, religion, great stories, and life, the idea is that you actually go on the hero's journey many times throughout life. And what you're doing is you're going in, it is an internal experience, right? So you may go on a retreat, right, and have an epiphany. Or you go hiking with a bunch of guys, or go to a conference or a church, or you sit alone in a room and you get an epiphany. You get taken deeper into a reality, right? This is kind of the interesting thing about being a human being, is we're experiencing the physical and external reality, and there's always something internal going on, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally. And the point of it, according to Joseph Campbell, which I think is interesting, is you leave the Shire, you go into Mordor, you fight the bad guys, you come back to the Shire. You leave, you're Luke Skywalker, you leave Tatooine, you go out to another part of the galaxy, you fight all the bad guys, you come back to Tatooine, and always when you come back, you feel a little bit less at home. Right? This is like going on a mission trip, and you have this tremendous spiritual high, and then you come back and you go, this is not as great as I thought it was, right? Or you realize you took some things for granted, you become grateful for other things, and then you kind of tend to drift back into normalcy. And you can tell yourself a story, which is, I just need to live on the mission field. But that is actually not the point of the experience. That's not the point of leaving the Shire or going and blowing up the Death Star or what have you. The point is to integrate the two experiences. And Joseph Campbell calls this becoming a master of two worlds. And so the point is where you are, for example, experiencing this vibrant inner spiritual life and engaging with the external world, where the external is teaching you something about the internal. Because again, we find our calling through work, right? Clarity comes with action. We don't act our way into clarity. We don't wait for clarity before we act. We act our way into clarity. And so we experience the external that teaches us something about the internal, and then the internal informs the external. And Parker Palmer, another thing that he says, great book that I highly recommend, called Let Your Life Speak. Let Your Life Speak. And it's a book about finding your calling, your vocation, through this act of listening to your life. And what does he say? Is the life I'm living the life that wants to be lived in me? Or is the life that wants to be lived in me, is it reflected in the life that I'm living? And most of us feel a little sense of angst, like there's something not quite harmonious. And so I think the process of becoming a whole person, right? Integrity is wholeness. It doesn't mean you're necessarily honorable, as I'm sure you know, is the process of integrating the external with the internal. You look at the life of somebody like Jesus. He has to, in some ways, kind of remove himself from the external at times. I gotta go. You people are crazy. I gotta go be alone for a while. But there is this beautiful integration between the inner life and the outer life. And I think we're all seeking that in our own way. And so it's not about being the best vine swinger, because the truth, Evan, is you may have to fall. You may have to fall again to realize I'm not here to swing on vines anymore. I got to get on the boat and leave the island and see the rest of the world, whatever that might look like.
Interesting. So specifically, there's something I wanted to kind of talk about towards the end of this, because I'm in that process of, okay, I hit the ground floor. Maybe this pastor shtick isn't my thing.
Sure.
And, there's a lot of people that say, oh, what you're doing right now is a ministry. It's pastoral. I get that.
Sure.
My idea was vocational ministry.
Yeah.
This is a little bit different, and I'm fine with that.
Right.
And so now I'm kind of on this journey where, I've wanted to be a writer, and I've looked back. I was like, all right, how long have I been wanting to do this actually? And I did the math this morning. 15 years.
Oh, wow.
I've been doing this for 15 years. I haven't done it. There was 1 week, like over 15 years ago, where 3 different people was like, hey, I think you're going to write books. 3 people don't know each other, all said it in the same week.
Wow.
And part of that holdback, I think, from writing is because I was like, okay, great. I need to be a pastor. That will give me credibility. That will establish me. That will do all these other things to take me more seriously. And also there's this part where I feel like there's an imposter syndrome where who am I to write a book on changing the way you think, or, different biblical truths or philosophies, because I struggle with this crap in my own life. So how should I be an authority to speak on any of this? So I want to do these things, but I'm struggling. So I guess I say all that to ask, what advice would you give me to just get over the hump and start doing it?
I have started to think about, there's 2 questions that you can ask yourself in any given situation, especially when you're doing what you've done, which is spend 15 years saying, I want to do this and not doing it. And the same thing happened to me. I was approaching my 30s. I had a family, and I wanted to be a writer, and I never had done it. And so every year I'd say, I'm going to write a book. And every year I wouldn't write a book. And I started to get really frustrated with myself. And I started to dive deep into the why. Why do I do this to myself, right? You ever do this? Why am I late to everything? Why can't I stop eating Doritos? Whatever it might be. And I have now come to believe that is not necessarily a useful question. Now, I'm a fan of therapy. I've done many years of therapy, dug deep into the skeletons of my past. And I remember one time meeting with a therapist where I was trying to find, why am I this way? And did my dad say something to me when I was 6.5 years old? And there's a lot of value to that. And I think there's, something very interesting and helpful about the study of trauma. And I got deep into the weeds on that. But I got particularly obsessed with a particular issue, and I wouldn't let it go, to the point that I took a 10-hour road trip, went to, the house where I grew up, dragged my son along, went to this place that signified a significant memory in my childhood, and then this place and this place and that place. And I was waiting to feel something, and I didn't feel it. And I go back to my therapist, I go, what is this about? And why can't I find this? And he goes, look, if you open the closet and you go rifling around in the closet trying to find skeletons and you can't find them, then it's a pretty good sign that there aren't any skeletons there. There aren't any new skeletons there, and it's okay to move on. And so I have started, I think it's helpful and worthy to ask the question why, and to begin to get some sort of understanding about why haven't I done this? But I think a lot of us can dwell on things like insight. I realized I did this because, my dad said this to me, or I've had a lot of failure, or girls rejected me because I was overweight in high school, or whatever it is. All valid stuff. And yet that information and insight in and of itself does not lead to transformation. So insight plus action equals transformation. And we live in a society and culture that's addicted to insights. Church is a wonderful example of this. You go to church, pastor says something, you go, I never thought about that Bible verse that way, or I didn't know that about that. Did you know that in first century Israel, they did this, this, and this? Great. Those are wonderful insights. That is not transformation. insight plus action equals transformation. And I'm not talking about like political action or social justice. That's great too. I'm just talking about you learn something internally, you bring it to the external, and that's where it begins to get integrated. So instead of asking why, what is the other question that we can ask? The question is, now what? Now, Evan, what are you going to do with this information that you've realized, I haven't written a book for 15 years? Because you could dwell. You could spend the next year going, why don't I do this? And maybe it's because of this, maybe it's because of that. And maybe all those things are true. I actually find that information not that useful. And so the question is, now what? And for myself, I just got sick and tired of disappointing myself. And it was a very self-oriented decision. Like I felt like I was losing integrity and trust with myself, right? Because I was making a promise to myself, every year I'm going to write a book, and every year I couldn't. And I think if you can't keep a promise to yourself, you're not going to be able to keep a promise to anybody else. And I also believe that we only ever do things that work for us. So not writing a book for 15 years worked for you. The question is, does it still work today?
Long pause here.
I mean, that's it, because you're going to keep doing the thing that works for you, right? And another way of thinking about it is you'll only ever take action on something when the pain of standing still is now greater than the pain of moving forward.
Right. Pain versus pleasure.
Yeah. And there's lots of interesting studies on this, but most neuroscientists agree that we used to think we do things because we are either avoiding pain or pursuing pleasure. And the truth is that we are, at a neurological level, always only ever avoiding pain.
I think when I look at because for whatever reason, 15 years is a long time. And I don't, I have probably like 6 pages worth of ideas of different titles or theories, not theories, but structures of ideas for books. I think at the end of the day, the excuse I've been giving myself is I haven't lived long enough to feel like I can give good quality advice.
Yeah. And how old are you?
I'm 32 now.
Yeah. What is it? Flannery O'Connor says that if you have survived childhood, you have a lifetime's worth of writing material. I mean, yeah, it is true. But I understand that, it sounds like you dig a little bit of theology. I think it's helpful to know that John Calvin wrote all of his great works before 30.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, whether you like Calvinism or not, I mean, all these guys, they only lived to 40, so they had to get busy. Right. And another way to think about it is, I mean, let's be honest, all niceties aside, dumber people than you have done this sooner.
Right. Yeah.
And there was a jealous, petulant part of me that was like, look at these people saying these things. I could at least do that well. I could do better than them. Yeah. And I mean, there's no magic words that a person can say to motivate somebody from inaction to action. But there just does come a point where you're like, I'm kind of tired of this. I think I'm going to try. And I do think that what was challenging for me is I want to write a book. And the truth was I needed to write a blog post. I needed to write an article. I had a friend for 2 years say, I have a great idea for a book. And he told me, I go, yeah, that's a great idea. What have you written on it? Well, nothing. It's so good. It needs to be a book. You haven't written an article? No. Have you written a tweet? No. An email? Nothing, And it's like, well, start with that. Because the truth is you're lying to yourself and you say, I'm going to write a book someday if you're not writing something today, right?
Right.
Because you don't write a book. You write a page, you write a paragraph, you write a sentence. Like books get written one piece at a time. And so you have to learn how to write those pieces and then you begin to put them together.
Right. As we're talking, I think I've come into my aha why I've struggled to start a book. And so here's some vulnerability. I started to learn how to read in 6th grade, which is way behind the curve.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And when I say start, I legitimately mean I started reading in 6th grade. Like, I had a vision issue. It wasn't dyslexia, but it was caught later in my life to where one eye would try to focus reading straight and another eye would just kind of quit and just drop down. And so it would actually cause me to see two things. So I'd never be able to see the same thing twice, essentially. And so it was just really hard. And what made it hard to catch is because dyslexia is easier to catch than apparently what I had, although mine is curable, where dyslexia is a little bit harder.
Oh, well.
So by the time I started, I was so far behind in my reading ability and my skills. Now my reading is probably more advanced than most. I mean, you can look at the books behind me. You know, when I graduated high school and went into college, I had a 7th grade reading level. Wow. So just imagine a 7th grader going in to read college books. Like that was my life. Grateful that God brought a lot of healing to that area. But I still struggle with spelling. I still struggle with grammar. I still struggle with all these things. And I think I get frustrated at myself for not being able to do a better job. And I know going into this, it's going to be a lot harder and require more of me than what I feel like I want to put into it yet.
Yeah. So you don't want to.
Yeah.
I do think it's a helpful tool for us to say, I'm not doing this thing because I don't want to. Because the truth is that people only ever really do what they want.
Yeah.
And until you acknowledge that, you aren't taking ownership of your life, and life is something that's happening to you. Now, I'm not saying that everything happens to you is your fault.
Right.
But it is your responsibility to do something about it. And the question is now what? Make a decision. I want to do this, and I'm willing to work through the challenges ahead of me to do it. And people don't, I mean, so that's sort of the positive self-help, like, go do it, man, side of things. But there is a reality, which is like, you don't have to. Like, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. I do this with health and fitness sometimes. I go, I want to get healthier. I'm like, but no, like when I'm eating the cookie, I'm saying I'm good with where I'm at right now. And it only ever produces suffering when we say, I want to do this, but I can't. Right. Instead of going, I want to do this, but right now I choose to not do this. I choose to do something else. And I sure do love this cookie. And I'm okay with the consequences that the cookie creates. Instead of going, I eat the cookie and now I hate myself. And I think we often get caught in patterns, of saying you want to do something, not doing it, based on a story that we continue to tell ourselves, right? Which was like, I was working with a coaching client one time. I work with creative entrepreneurs.
Real quick, I do know it's almost at the top of the hour. Do you still have a little bit of time?
I'm good. Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Sorry. No, I'm good. No, I was working with this woman and she said, I don't finish things. I said, really? You don't finish things? How long were you a teacher before you quit teaching to become a mom? She said 7 years. I was a teacher for 7 years. Did you ever quit teaching during that time? No. So you did something for 7 years without quitting. Right. Okay. And then how long have you been running this business? For about 8 years. You've been running this 6-figure online education business while raising 3 daughters for 8 years. Yes. And have you ever quit? Well, not really. No. I've been doing it ever since then. So why do you say that you never finish things? Well, when I was a kid, my mom said, ... And so it is interesting how certain stories keep getting repeated in our head. I was rejected by girls all of, middle school and high school pretty traumatically. I was catfished by a friend of mine in 8th grade where I thought I had my first girlfriend online, on AOL Instant Messenger. And it turned out it was my friend Robert punking me,
You and me both, man.
and it's funny, and we could talk about it. That was horrible. I mean, that broke my heart and killed my confidence, coming to school, at the end of 8th grade and having all my friends laugh and going, why are they laughing at me? That's never a good sign. And then finding out for 6 months, this was happening. And then I would go ask a girl out and I would do it kind of sheepishly and she'd say no. And, small wonder I wasn't confident. And I remember in college saying to my friends, like, well, I'm just not attractive. Like that's, and I had like lost a bunch of weight, gotten into shape and, gotten in good shape and become, like a pretty well-known person on campus. I won the school talent show. And I said, girls don't like me. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? This girl flirts with you and that girl flirts with you. And I was like, no, she's just being nice to me. Like that doesn't happen, dude. Like they're flirting with you. And I was still kind of caught in this story, and the external reality was very different, but I kept creating the reality, which is like, girls don't want to go out with me. And so I would ask the girl out, or I would approach her, and I would do it very unconfidently, and they'd say no, or they'd, kind of falter. And then I'd go, don't worry about it, or whatever. And so it is interesting how the stories we tell ourselves keep creating the same reality, which is you had a reading/learning disability eye issue, it sounds like. And so you struggle to read. And then you go, but look at the bookshelf. And isn't it funny how we as human beings can be very aware of what's going on and still kind of believe it, and also not believe that we believe it, right? Like, no, I have an above average reading ability now. And yet in the back of my head, there's still this story of unworthiness. And I think the great question to ask, Evan, is not just why, but now what?
So let's get hypothetical here for a second. Let's say I start writing because I don't know. I haven't promised someone that I would, but I indicated pretty strongly that I would, just for the fact that I wouldn't look like a chump later. So I kind of made myself, anyway, a mentor that I want in my life. And I was like, hey, I'll do this. And so
great.
Next time I go to him, I'm going to have to show up with something, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Sure.
So what would the next steps be, man? Like, because I have all these ideas. How do I process through it? What, I don't have the excuse I don't have time. That's not true. But how do I find the right time to write in, the podcast, in my other business, when have 2 screaming kids? Like, practically, what can I do to just get my butt up other than stand?
What you can do is you can end this interview and spend 5 minutes writing something, and go eat a cookie or whatever you like to eat. Because what happens is you go, I had a great conversation with Jeff, and then, my wife comes in, from with the 2 kids who are screaming or whatever, and life takes over, and you go, I'll do that tomorrow. And when you are trying to create a habit, you have to start small and you have to reward yourself. And you can read all the research, on Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, but it's basically that. And eventually we can talk about how to synchronize everyday things that you do, like brush your teeth or drink coffee or eat breakfast or go to the bathroom or whatever, with something that you want to change. But really, the thing to do is to not wait for a perfect time, not to plan it, not to schedule. Those things come eventually. But the thing to do is go, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to call bull crap on myself and say, you got enough time, you have enough ideas, just write something. And so I would pick one idea. It does not matter which one. Pick the worst one. Don't pick the best one, pick the worst one. Because you know which one that is. Pick the worst one and write for 5 minutes. And then go to your mentor and say, I did this, and I'm going to try to do it again tomorrow. And actually reward yourself. I mean, this is what happens to guys like you and me is if there's any sort of shame, and there's shame in everybody, but if there's any sort of shame, rejection in your past, and you try to do something that you said you wanted to do for a long time, be creative, write a book, start that new thing, lose this many pounds, it's an all or nothing thing. And you do it every once in a while, like you're binging, right? I used to write for 3 hours once on a random Saturday after I'd had like 2 pitchers full of coffee, and I go, I'm going to write something, and I thought I had a book in me, and I had like half of a chapter. And in between those bouts of writing, those fits and starts, I did nothing. And eventually I just realized I want to be a writer. And a friend said to me, he said, Jeff, you are a writer. You just need to write. And I believe that activity follows identity, that before you can go do something, you have to become the kind of person that would do those things. And the way that you do that is you resolve in yourself. You go, I'm a writer. now I'm going to start. What do writers do? Well, I figured they write every day. So I got up the next morning at 5 a.m. and I wrote, and I kind of liked that. And that felt good. Wrote about 500 words, nothing super long. I ended up publishing on my blog because I realized that when I show up, do something, and there's expectation, it forces me to show up the next day. Right. And I just started doing this every single day. And I did this for a year, and I wrote more content and better content than I had written in the previous 10 years of kind of dabbling with it.
That's actually kind of cool, because this podcast is something that I've been wanting to do for 5 years. Okay. Yeah. And it was this year that I started. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing some stuff change, and exactly what you're saying is just kind of like, one day I reached out to someone and I was going to buy a podcast, and they're like, great. Yeah, you can buy my podcast because I'm not going to do it anymore. And
wow.
Yeah. And so then he's like, start recording. I'll send you the contract. So I started recording, and then all of a sudden we both decided that it would be best if I just created my own voice and not take over his podcast. Oh. But that wasn't the plan originally. And so as I was creating, not that he intentionally ghosted me, but we kind of both simultaneously ghosted each other. And then I found my own voice.
Yep. It goes back to what we were saying before, which is that you wanted something, and the way that you got it surprised you.
Yeah.
Welcome to being a human being.
So before we end, I have 3 questions I like to ask every guest.
Okay.
What is the biggest lie in self-talk you have had or currently struggle with?
I'm not good enough. Yeah. People don't like me. I am not valuable unless I do something for someone. I remember talking to a friend of mine. When you start a podcast, you can start talking to people that otherwise you feel like wouldn't give you the time of day.
Right.
And then I feel like I've had a pretty charmed career as a writer, and getting to meet basically all of my heroes and call them friends. In a way where it was like, they said yes to having lunch with me when I was nobody. Right. And I'm like, right. And I asked them later, like, why'd you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I just kind of felt like it. And so I've, met rock stars, and, world-class musicians and writers and entrepreneurs and all these people. And I was talking to a friend of mine recently, like, I don't know, why does this person hang out with me? One of my favorite musicians of all time is now a good friend of mine. I go, why? I don't know. I don't know why these people want to hang out with me, because I'm not really offering anything to them. I wonder what it's about, And my friend said to me, he goes, I think you don't realize people want to hang out with you because they enjoy being around you. And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't know that. So I have this fundamental idea that there's something broken and flawed with me. And in order to get you to like me, I've got to prove something to you.
Gotcha. What brings you peace?
I think, the most practical thing I can do to sort of get centered is go outside and go for a walk and get into nature. If I'm sitting down, I can kind of feel my body. I can feel like my belly fat kind of hanging over my, belt, and I feel a little bit uncomfortable. Or if I'm with somebody, I can feel a little bit insecure about, what are they thinking? Do they like me? If I can get alone and go for a walk at a park, go for a hike, I never leave those experiences feeling stressed.
What's the best decision you've ever made?
The best decision I ever made was, and I keep making it, this is why it's the best decision I've ever made. The best decision I ever made was when I had an opportunity to go teach English in China for a year. And I thought it was what I wanted to do. I wanted to go be a missionary. And then I was offered an opportunity to travel the country playing with a music ministry, kind of be in a rock band, which I had always wanted to do. It was a dream that I had, and I felt like I had to give it up, right? This was when I thought being a good spiritual person meant giving up all the things that you wanted. And then this thing, like right before graduating, this opportunity fell back in my lap, and I was like, go be a missionary in China and suffer for Jesus, or like kind of be a rock star, right? And it was like, one of these looks way more spiritual than the other. And I felt this deep sense that going to China was the wrong decision. And I had felt it the whole way, but it was just the only option that I had. And then this opportunity to play with this band came, and I really, really wanted to do it. And I struggled with doing something that I wanted to do, thinking God would be okay with that. And I decided to tour with the band, and it was a wonderful, hard, and amazing year. And it was the best decision I ever made, because it was the first time that I remember trusting myself, my intuition, that still small voice that wasn't just me. I don't believe, And every great decision I have made since then, or almost every great decision that I can remember, I've listened to that voice and responded in spite of, what other people might think or what seems right or wrong in the moment. That's always steered me in the right direction.
Awesome. I'm going to wrap it up here, but if you still got a few minutes, I have a question after I end it.
Cool.
Okay. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. I mean, if you look here, I have notes all over my paper, and awesome. You had a lot of great nugget and one-liners, man. I just thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and just the contribution that you've made here to the audience and through your work to all the people around the world, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure, Evan. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Have a great day, man.
Thanks, you too.
All right. When I started this podcast, it was important for me to lead by example, that I wouldn't hide behind a fake mask, acting like I've arrived and speaking from the mountaintop. My whole purpose was to be vulnerable about where I was, my failures, my struggles, and my successes, so that I could be a bridge, that I could be a gap in this process of showing people how to change in the areas of faith, family, finances, friendship, fitness, and fun, because that's exactly where I'm at and what I'm doing. And I had a coach years ago, and he was the first coach I've ever had. And he did it for a very affordable rate because I couldn't afford anything more than what he offered me. But he told me this: Evan, someday you're going to get in a spot where you're going to be able to give back to others. And I want you to remember what I'm doing for you here and now, that it's made affordable so that you can actually go through it. He goes, I believe in you, and I trust that you'll do this. And so because of that, it resonated within me that at a certain point, when I felt I've had enough hard knocks that I had something to offer other people, I would start a coaching program. And this is that. I am now starting a coaching program, and I'm going to make it affordable, because by the graces of someone else that helped me out when I was first starting my journey, I wanted to do the same for other people. So I'm going to offer a free 15-minute coaching phone call to anyone that wants it. You can go to the website, thewholepersonpodcast.com, and sign up for that free coaching phone call. And if you're looking to have a longer, extended coaching relationship outside of that first 15-minute phone call, I have the prices right up front. I'm open about it, and I'd be more than happy to see if we'd work well with one another and can help you reach and achieve the goals that you have in life. Guys, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the show.